The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. You're listening to a Truly Human Leadership podcast refresher, where we reshare insight from podcast episodes from the past. It's been almost 8 years since the publication of Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family by Raj Sisodia, one of the founders of Conscious Capitalism, and Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman. It's the story of Bob and Barry-Wehmiller's journey from traditional business thinking to truly human leadership. And all these years later, people are still discovering the book and are touched by the story. The demand for caring leadership, as seen in the last couple of years in the cultural phenomenon known as the Great Resignation, is becoming greater and greater, and it is something companies can no longer ignore. As Bob and Raj talk about in their book, the reason we at Barry-Wehmiller want our leaders to care about our people is because they are someone's precious child with hopes and dreams for a future through which they can realize their full potential. They're not roles to fill or functions that serve to do what we want so we can be successful. They are people who should be cared for just like I would care for my own child, and deserving to receive that care from others. The universal truth that is at the center of Bob and Raj's book is every one of us, no matter what our job or where we live, simply wants to know that who we are and what we do matters. It is not something born of a moment in time, but a purpose leaders in business should embrace in every aspect of their lives. Business could be the most powerful force for good if it could only embrace this realization. Around the time of Everybody Matters' release, Bob and Raj did a number of interviews talking about why they wrote the book and what they hoped to accomplish by writing it. We featured a couple of them on this podcast in the past, and on this THL refresher, we'd like to revisit them. So here's Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia.
We never intended to write a book, but someone Raj knows, Srikumar Rao, came down, stimulated by my participation in a leadership guru summit hosted by Simon Sinek. Srikumar came down and visited our operation with two other very fine leaders, and sat across from me and said, Bob, I've interviewed, as contributing editor to Forbes, I believe it was, he said, I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of CEOs, and I've never seen anything like what I just experienced. You need to share this with the world. And we had been encouraged to think about a book by Adrian Zackheimer, the publisher at Penguin, when he experienced our leadership culture through the massive event that Simon Sinek did. But our mindset was not to write a book. And it was Srikumar's passionate statement that we needed that caused us to really move over and say, maybe we ought to think about it. And so we went back to Penguin, Adrian, as well as Srikumar, and for some suggestions for some co-authors, people who would add a great deal to this process. And several names were surfaced, one of which was Raj. So Raj came to us as a very thoughtful, established author with his most recent book, Conscious Capitalism. So Raj came highly recommended, and so we approached Raj.
My initial reaction was to say, well, it looks like a great company and an example of what we write about, but there are lots of those companies, right? I mean, we write about 28 of them in terms of endearment. So I don't necessarily see the point in writing a separate book about a particular company. So the question is, how does this advance what we know about this way of being? And so Bob at the time basically said, okay, why don't you just plan to come out here and visit and experience it, and then you decide, So a few months later, in July of that year, I think, I finally did get a chance, and Bob and his team came over to Boston within a few miles of where I live and picked me up, and we spent those 2 days in Phillips and Green Bay and then here. And then I did experience the things that make this culture unique and this story unique. And to me, it did take the idea of conscious capitalism further, because it advanced my understanding or thinking about two of the four pillars that we have around higher purpose and around leadership. So we talk about conscious leadership and higher purpose. Typically, we refer to higher purpose in terms of the products or services that companies produce and how they impact the customers and change their well-being. But as Bob talked about, the primary purpose here is the people. He said our products are great, but they're not necessarily going to inspire people to come and work for us. They're not changing the world. They're not cutting edge. They're necessities, right? Machines that are used to produce daily necessities of living. So he said our people are our purpose. And to me, that was a very compelling way to think about it, to say, every company has to have a people-related purpose in addition to a product purpose. So I thought that universalized the message of conscious capitalism, because we would hear this periodically from companies who said, we don't know how to find a higher purpose. We're a company that makes this basic commodity or some, mundane product, and we really can't get very exciting for our people. So this, to me, made it now something that every company in the world deals with people, so that could be your higher purpose, and it should be, ultimately. I think that's more essential than having a product-related purpose. Ideally, you want both, but that's essential. And the second was around the idea of leadership, where we talked about conscious leadership in terms of enabling people to find meaning and purpose at work and be highly engaged and creative and satisfied. But we really had focused primarily on the work environment, so work day, work week. And we had never really thought about or talked about the impact that leadership has on people's lives outside of work, beyond work, and on the people in their families. So the ripple effect of leadership being far greater than we realized, that was the second message. So those two were very compelling to me. And the third really was the context. This is, again, small towns, it's industrial, very old companies in many cases. And if it can be made to work in that very challenging context, then there's no company in the world that really can say it can't work for us. So all those factors made it really compelling, in addition to Bob's own journey as a leader, which I thought was a very interesting story as well.
I think, as I recall, what meant a lot to me was what we wanted to bring to the process of sharing this message was a larger context. And from both firms of endearment that Raj had written about, firms that were loved by their customers and employees that outperformed the market fundamentals. And then conscious capitalism being very conscious, like Whole Foods, a great example of a conscious capitalism company, and created and also encouraged the conscious capitalism movement. And as I recall, when I approached Raj, he said, sounds great, as you said, but I'm so committed right now to a second book for John Mackey, a further book of Firms of Endearment. I just can't, in good faith, do this right now. I said, that's fine, but you might want to stop by sometime and see what the business is about. When very thoughtful, Raj followed up probably 3 or 4 months later for a 2-day visit. And I'll never forget Rhonda telling me, so I didn't hear this directly, but Rhonda said, after Raj's first day, he looked at Rhonda and said, this is a book that has to be written, and I want to write this book. And so I think he felt, it's a little bit like the same thing I talked to you about the McKinsey people who said, it's one thing to read about it, your example of reading it, going to our website, other information I sent you. It's another feeling when you meet Randall Fleming and some of these other people, that it's hard to put into words something that's so unusual. And Raj really said the same thing Srikumar Rao said, Tavo Gufton said, Ruma Bose says, all the people, Bill Urey, Simon Sinek. I've never seen anything like this. And it was the continual message of, I've never seen anything like this. You need to share it with the world. And Simon Sinek said, you're being stingy, not sharing this with the world. So what we came with is a realization, these ideas, this advancement in our thinking that occurred in these learning moments really led us to feeling that we had been given, the accumulation of these experiences had given us a powerful message that when others saw it, like Raj, Srikumar, and so forth, that they said, I've never seen anything like it. And it made us realize that there's something powerful here from the human experience that we so desperately need. So I think Raj was moved by the people's stories rather than what he heard when he saw the faces. It's like Amy Cuddy, who came down with Simon to look at doing a Harvard Business Review case study, and she looked at Simon after talking to some of our people and said, "We can't write a case study." And Simon said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because I don't think words can express what I just felt." And I think that's what the McKinsey people said. I think that's what you realize when you see the faces and the story and hear the stories. It's so much more powerful than you can almost capture in words. And I think we have done everything we can do through stories in the book and the flow of the book to engage people in this journey we've been on to be better stewards of the lives entrusted to us. So I think Raj felt that and felt compelled to write that. And I believe what you've now written about is very much what you felt that first time.
Yes, and I think we've tried to capture even things that really cannot be captured. But I think through stories, as you said, you do create a vivid sense for people of what it's like. I mean, I had never experienced so many middle-aged men crying, as I saw in those 2 days. I would ask a simple question: tell me how it was before this business got acquired by Barry-Wehmiller and how it is now. And before they could even start telling me, many of them would essentially choke up. So it was. And that your body speaks louder than your words sometimes. So it told me the depth of impact that this had on people's lives. And most companies suppress that. I mean, you're not allowed to really express yours. So people have learned how to keep that. But most companies don't also elicit that depth of feeling either.
I always say I've never seen. I think our empowerment team says if we don't get man tears, we know we did something. Didn't do something right. And I say to myself, we didn't design our university class in terms of truly human leadership and developing leadership fundamentals to tap into people's emotions. We tapped into people's deepest sense of right. And when you tap into people's deepest sense of right, we touch their soul and unlock their emotions, and they realize what they haven't been to the very people that they care for. So I think that's the key, is that we've tapped into people's deepest sense of right.
When it came to writing the book, Bob and Raj didn't want it to be just a story about Bob or Barry-Wehmiller. They also wanted to give readers tangible information about how they can implement change in their own company. Here's Raj and Bob talking about the structure of the book and how it developed.
So Bob's trajectory as a leader, spanning 40 years, I mean, that's a good amount of time, from a very young person in his 20s to where he is now. And the series of awakenings that he had along the way very much followed that classic framework of Joseph Campbell, which was the hero's journey. That you start out living life in a certain way with a certain set of values, priorities, and so forth, and goals. And then at some point it starts to feel like the inauthentic life, and then you start to look for something deeper. And then when conditions are ripe, then certain things happen in your life, certain experiences. And you're ready at that point to view those experiences through a different set of eyes and take away from that certain lessons. And I think that happened. So I think the story does kind of weave through that pattern. And when you go through all of the challenges and all the learnings and all the lessons that you have, then at the end of the journey really is that you're bringing back this elixir, as it's called, and you're now sharing that with the community, so that other people can learn from your experience. They don't have to go through that exact journey and learn those exact lessons, but they can actually start with those and maybe go on their journey from that point forward. So that, in a way, is what this book is. This is kind of the elixir that has been gathered over these last 40 years, but especially in the last 15, 20 years, that can now be shared with the world and will really help people get to a better place much faster without a lot of the pain that you have to go through.
Yeah, I think when Adrian, the publisher at Penguin, first approached us, he said, "Now this is not going to be about Bob Chapman or Barry-Wehmiller. The message is about leadership." And we said, "Absolutely, we agree." And we began that. And when Raj got into it, you backed off and said, "No, we've got to kind of bring people through your journey so that they can relate to the arc, if you will, from traditional management to truly human leadership. They need to almost experience that arc of transition from one to the other, and you felt and convinced the publishers that was an important piece. And so telling the story from the perspective of these awakenings that occurred in that journey, so that people could relate to the evolution of thought, rather than just being presented with a thought, that they actually see the evolution of the thought process through these awakenings.
That brings in the emotional hook, that brings in sort of the personal dimension. You can put yourself in Bob's shoes, and you can be in that room with him when certain things happen. When the economic downturn came, for example, you're in that hotel room in Italy with him, struggling with, we say we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people, and what do we do now? Those kinds of things. I think stories are an extremely powerful way to communicate a message and communicate the learnings. In this book, we do both. The first half of the book really is the journey, and it's kind of the why, and and the second half of the book is very much a hands-on, practical guide to enabling this kind of transformation in your own organization. So I think we were able to come up with a hybrid. But without the first part, it really doesn't motivate you to say, okay, why doing all these things that are in the second part. But the first part really makes the case as to why you need to do this and why you should do this and what will happen when you do, what will be the consequences. So I think it makes for a much more compelling way of thinking about it. And my inspiration for that really was a classic book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was a very well-established psychiatrist in Vienna, Austria, who came up with this thing called logotherapy, which is helping people discover meaning and purpose in their life as a path to being happy. As I said, you cannot be happy unless you have meaning and purpose in your life. And the book that he wrote ultimately after he came back from Auschwitz, and it's an interesting story in terms of his own life and how he tested his own theories. But the book that he wrote was essentially in two parts. One was kind of his experiences in a concentration camp and testing these ideas. And the second half of the book is the theory itself. How do you do it? How do you implement these ideas? So that was the model for me.
I think what's interesting to me in the evolution of the book is, again, Raj came back with this, I think we want to tell the hero's journey, which caused us to reflect on these series of awakenings that led to our concept of truly human leadership. But the other piece, which I thought was particularly interesting, was the idea that developed towards the end that we needed a prologue. And the idea of the prologue is if you just read the prologue and nothing else, you basically have gotten the message of the book. And I thought the effort to introduce the human side, the human impact of leadership, through telling Ken Chapman's story in the prologue was a powerful way of opening people's hearts and minds to what they're going to read about. Because what you feel is the impact leadership has on people's lives. Through Ken's life, trying to raise a family, to provide for them with the insecurity of a business that laid off and hired and laid off, and there was no sense of security at a young life trying to bring children into this world. So I think the combination of the prologue, which introduces this message in a very human way to the people affected by leadership and management, to then the journey, the arc that we had from traditional management practices to truly human leadership, to then how do you actuate? How do you actually do this? I get it. I want to do it, but how do I do it? So we didn't want to just awaken people's need for this. We wanted to give them a path to actualize caring, which I think is the essence of the book. But we had to open people's hearts, which I think the prologue does. We need to explain to them the journey so they could relate to the journey from where they are in traditional management to actually caring and truly human leadership, to then how do you do that? How do you actualize? If you're with us now through these two pieces, then join us in, here's how you do it. And I think that all worked out very well from my perspective.
Because the message of Everybody Matters is so important to Bob, to Raj, and Barry-Wehmiller, there are a lot of hopes for it as it's released into the world. Here Bob and Raj discuss the audience the book was written for and what their hopes are for its impact.
I think this is a book that really has potentially a very, very wide appeal to a lot of people. Anybody who aspires to be a leader of any kind at any level in any kind of organization. That could be families, that could be companies, that could be other kinds of organizations, because this really is ultimately about leadership as stewardship and recognizing the impact that we have. And we all are playing multiple roles in our lives, and everybody has those dimensions. And even if you're not doing it today, we aspire to that in the future. So we really hope that anybody who is interested in and aspires to be a leader would find very important life lessons in this book.
My hope, I think my dream when we started the book is that it would be the foundational handbook of anybody who aspired to leadership in any the military, healthcare, education, business, nonprofit, anybody who aspires to be a responsible leader, to care for the people whose life they touch, that this book would awaken them to that profound sense of responsibility. We hope mothers read it to have hope for their children, to go out into the world, to have hopes that their spouses will be able to work for an organization like this. So our hope is, for this audience is, as Raj says, that it becomes the foundational handbook for leadership. Leadership is the stewardship of the lives entrusted to you. What does that mean? And how do I care? How do I care about the people? This is a universal need. It's a global need. It's not an American issue. It is a global issue. And that our hope was that this would inspire people, awaken people to the profound responsibility that leadership is over other people's lives, and allow them to, in a disciplined way, to begin to show that they care about those lives. So that was our dream, that it was a pretty broad spectrum that we were focused on to appeal to this book. And I think the title implies that everybody matters. And that applies to whether you're in the school system or whether you're in a hospital in town, whether you're in the military. And so our hope was that to have a broad bandwidth of exposure for this book in the hopes of awakening people to the profound responsibility leadership represents.
You know, in society we tend to put people into categories, and we tend to have a hierarchical way of thinking. You know, you got the gifted and talented kids, for example, in schools, and they get special attention and special exposure to things, and others don't. And I heard an expression once, a teacher said, well, they can't all be special, right? That we can only do it for so many. The fact is, every human being is unique, and every human being is extraordinary in so many ways. And in the world of business especially, we have a tendency to really value a few people and then kind of disregard the vast majority. And not coincidentally, the fact is only a few people are therefore engaged in their work, and most people are not, because they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen, they don't feel valued, respected, etc. And when you change that, when you turn that around, recognize that every single person has the potential for greatness. And it's up to us to figure out to create the conditions within which that can happen. And that includes how we lead them, and also how we listen to them, how much freedom we give them, etc. That so many extraordinary things can happen. We human beings have almost divine capacities, but most of us die with our music still inside us. It never comes out. And the way it comes out, in most cases, most powerfully, is when we're put into an organizational context where there is a compelling purpose, where there is a cohort of people we can work with. That's when human beings are capable of extraordinary things. So this is, I think, a way for people really to realize their extraordinary potential. But it says that the onus of creating those conditions is on leaders and those organizations, because it's not the people, you know, as one of the expressions here is, the people are fine. It's the leadership that's lacking. And that's, I think, what we're trying to convey here.
And as Raj just so beautifully said, everybody matters. Not most people, not some people, but everybody matters. And that's the world we imagine. That's the world we want to help move to, where everybody feels valued. And again, one of the key messages of the book is that we found that people desperately want to know that who they are and what they do matters. And when we share in thoughtful ways that you do matter and what you do matters, people blossom. And when they blossom, they go home fulfilled, and when they go home fulfilled, they have better families. And so that was one of the keys of the book, is that the way we lead profoundly impacts the way our colleagues who work with us, our team members, live their personal lives. It clearly has an impact on them.
This next interview was from a live event where Bob and Raj took questions from the audience. At times, the sound quality will reflect that, so forgive us. And once again, here's Raj and Bob.
So it's really been, for me, being part of this journey of discovering and learning about and then spreading the message of a better way to think about business, that it can be and is, in fact, the greatest engine of progress for humanity, but it can be done with business that actually creates even more value and takes away many of the so-called side effects that we have come to accept with traditional business. It doesn't have to be that way. We can have business with a spectrum of positive effects. It doesn't have to be you make money here and then you have some negative consequences on other things. It can all be positive. Everybody can win. And I think that this book takes that message even further. When I was first introduced to the company and to Bob, and I heard the outlines of the story, I said, that's great. There are lots of great businesses out there, and it would be impossible to write a book about each one, certainly for one person. So I said, we're not just looking for more examples of what we already know, but the question really is, can we learn something more? Does it take the story further than what we already have? And when I did first spend a couple of days visiting a number of the plants, meeting a bunch of the people, including Bob and others, I realized that there were multiple ways in which Barry-Wehmiller takes the idea of conscious capitalism even further. And I can get into those now if you want, or we can talk about that. So in conscious capitalism, we say business should have a higher purpose beyond profit. You have to be profitable. I mean, that's part of, you need to be profitable in order to survive, but that shouldn't be the purpose. There should be a reason for existing, just like we should have as human beings, a purpose in our lives. But we have thought about it typically in terms of the product. What do we do for customers? So all the companies I mentioned, Southwest Airlines, they all do certain things for their customers. That is their purpose. When I came to Barry-Wehmiller, I realized that, even if you are in a business that doesn't necessarily excite people, you make machines that make toilet paper or cardboard boxes or packaging, when they say that our purpose is our people, right? That we exist in order to impact people's lives in a positive way. So people are the ultimate purpose. And I think that was a compelling aspect of understanding this idea of purpose, that it universalizes this notion that even if you're not in a cutting edge, high tech, product category or something that people really crave, that you can still be a high purpose business. The second was the idea of leadership, where we talk about conscious leadership as something that gives people meaning and purpose and empowers them and respects them and so forth and does all the things in the context of the workplace. And here it was really the idea that the way we lead impacts the way people live. And so the impact goes beyond the work day and the work week. It impacts people's lives. It impacts their families, impacts their children, their communities. So there's a tremendous onus of responsibility of being a steward of the lives entrusted to you. So I thought they took the idea of responsibility when it comes to leadership way further than what we had thought. And the third, of course, was the context. This is small towns in the industrial Midwest for the most part, a part of the country that a lot of people have given up hope for. And for this to work in the industrial heartland of this country and to bring renewal and hope into those places, I think is extremely compelling. Because most of the businesses that we were dealing with were quite different from that.
The reason we said everybody matters, it was the realization we had as you get into the book that the people who we have the privilege of leading are somebody's precious child, and that is an awesome responsibility when you view it that way. And that was the major thing out of the book I want you to get, is that the people we invite into our organization are not functions. They're not receptionists, accountants, engineers, salespeople. They're somebody's precious child, and the way we lead will profoundly impact the way they live. In all my education, we talked about in business school and in public accounting, and then outside in my journey the last 40 years, I never heard anybody said that the way we lead our businesses, the way we lead our organizations, affects the way people live their lives. And so the profound thing we found is that when we care about the people who we have the privilege of leading, they go home and they're better husbands, wives, fathers, sons, daughters. And we know that for a fact because 90% of the feedback we get from our leadership model is how it affects people's personal life, their marriage, the way they raise their children. Why? Because when people go home not feeling valued, they treat people as they have been treated without even knowing it. And so we have people in this country who have jobs, they're not unemployed, they have jobs, they send their kids to college, they have homes, but inside they're hurting. Remember, when you realize that 88% of all people who work in this country feel they work for a company that does not care about them, and 3 out of 4 people in this country are disengaged, you see why we have the brokenness we have in our communities, in our families, in our country, and in the world. So if somebody asks you as a result of this book signing event what it was all about, the simple answer, it's about world peace. Right? It is. Bill Urey, look up Bill Urey, U-R-Y, on the internet, Harvard professor, he negotiates world peace. He came and visited Barry-Wehmiller, and when he left Barry-Wehmiller after 2 days, he said, this is the answer to world peace. Why? Because we have so much conflict in the world caused by people feeling hurt, okay? And they don't listen to each other, they talk to each other. So what we discovered along this journey is the incredible power business could have for good in the world if we simply cared about the people whose lives we have the privilege of leading. Bill Urey's statement was, and again, the same point, is he's been a part of global peace talks all of his career, since the 1987 Camp David Peace Accord. And what he now realizes, since he got involved in Barry-Wehmiller, is that we talk to each other in homes, in countries, but we don't listen to each other. And if you don't listen to each other, you don't understand or validate the other person, and you can't work together. So that my point to our, and again, the point of our message, the point of our leadership, is the most powerful thing we've learned and the most important thing we teach in our university, and Cynthia and I have a nonprofit that teaches around the country, is we need to learn to listen to each other. The most powerful gift of communication is the skill of listening with empathy to the other person, because it validates their worth. And it's with our children, our spouses, the people we work with. And unfortunately, we're taught to talk in our schools and to share our opinion, but we're not taught the skill of listening. And again, the skill of listening is dramatic. And so that is the biggest thing we've learned, that leadership is about listening. It's not about talking. It's about allowing the people who you have the privilege of leading to find their gifts, share their gifts, and be appreciated for doing that. So this leadership model that we talk about in the book all came from Cynthia and my experience in trying to raise 6 kids. It's not easy, okay? It's not easy to be married. I remember I had a group of presidents out in Los Angeles I'd given a speech to on this, and after the speech I said, does anybody disagree with me in the audience? Nope. I said, how many of you agree? Everybody raised their hand. I said, great. Ask me a question. A gentleman in the back of the room raised his hand and said, Mr. Chapman, I agree with everything you said about everybody matters. It makes obvious sense. But God damn, I think it would be hard to do that. And I said, are you married? He said, yes, I am. I said, I'm just curious. Do you find being married easy? He thought a minute and he said, no, God damn, it's hard to be married. Okay? And I said, what human relationship in your life is easy? Okay? Being married is not easy. Being the person that your spouse would like you to be. Being a parent is not easy. Being a leader is not easy. Okay? But we choose to be parents. We accept positions of leadership. But we don't give people the skills to be leaders. And the biggest message from this book has got to be the importance of the skill of listening. Bill Urey's hope is that instead of talk shows eventually, we have listening shows.
At one point, a member of the audience had a very interesting question. What part did personal faith play into the writing of Everybody Matters? Here are Raj and Bob's answers.
Yeah, I think for me, I was born in India as technically a Hindu, although I was never religious. My family was not religious, so I didn't grow up with any of that ancient wisdom as such. All I saw were the rituals, which nobody could explain what they meant. So I had none of that. And then I went to a series of Catholic convents in Barbados. So I got a lot of the Catholic guilt without... So I grew up, and then I wrote a book called Firms of Endearment, where we were looking at these kinds of businesses that are loved by everybody. And I went to India for my 25th MBA reunion, and I gave it to my mentor professor from my business school days. And I said, I'd really want to know what you think about this book, because it comes from my heart as much as from my head. It's about businesses that really care and that are loved, and they actually thrive in the world. And the next day when I went to see him, he said, normally I go to bed at 9, I was up till midnight reading your book. I said, I'm really enjoying it. I said, that means a lot to me coming from you. He said, yeah, but as I read it, I realize it's nothing new. I said, what do you mean? For me, this was very new compared to everything I had been taught in business school. He said, everything you're writing here was written 4,000 years ago. I said, well, I didn't see that business book. Where is that? He said, it's all there in the Gita. Now, the Gita is one of the Indian texts, right? The Bhagavad Gita, it's called. Right? He said, all these lessons we think are new that we're discovering today, they have been written and talked about and thought about very deeply. And for me, it was a real awakening moment, because I had never read any of that. I was not in touch with the ancient wisdom from any tradition, really. And after that, I started to read not only the Gita, the Vedanta. We actually did a series of conferences around the world called Practical Wisdom, where we did one on Judaism, one on Christianity, on Hinduism and Buddhism, Islam, etc. What is in the ancient wisdom that is relevant and practical in today's world of leadership and business? And there's a lot there. The ideas that we're still talking about thousands of years after they were articulated, and there's something there. So from those Indian traditions, the idea of purpose, right? Meaning and purpose. Spiritual values like that are very key. The idea of focusing on the quality of your actions and not being attached to the outcome. As the Buddha said, don't be attached to the outcome. We never control the outcome. All we control are our actions and how we show up in a situation. Right? So if we do that, then the outcomes take care of themselves. But if we are driven by a particular outcome, we're going to undertake actions that are not the right actions in order to achieve that predetermined outcome that we have decided upon. So again, these are pretty universal values. I think they're present in many places. And I think we need to be in touch, even if it's not overtly religious. It is spiritual. There is a hunger for meaning and purpose and lasting impact that we have as human beings. I think we tap into that with these ways of thinking.
Well, I would say to you, in the book, I acknowledge my mentor was the rector of our church. And, I don't talk about my faith in the book because we want as big a tent as we possibly can. So we really tried to eliminate any faith. But obviously, our faith, everybody matters is our faith, right? I mean, that most of our faith is everybody matters. I love the expression that God didn't make any junk, okay? And so I'd say to you that the belief in the goodness of people is our faith. Hope is our faith. And so I think our message is very consistent with my faith, that we're here with a purpose. How do we use and discover our gifts and let people be who they're intended to be and appreciated for that? One of the things, again, that we wove into this, which is around that, is what we call recognition and celebration. When we were raising children, when Cynthia and I were raising our 6 kids, I remember somebody saying, your communication with your children needs to be more positive than negative. You need to make more positive comment instead of, why didn't you come down for breakfast? Did you do your homework last night? Boy, I see you got in on time last night. Boy, nice grade. So we took that into our business, and recognition and celebration, which is looking for the goodness in people and holding it up. The other issue that I'd mentioned is we live in a world, when I was a kid, there was only 3 news stations, and we only had news one time a day, right? At 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night. Today, we have 24-hour news all the time. And what is news about? It's about the brokenness of this world, okay? The greed, the corruption, the scandals. We are in it, our people, you are all inundated with people focused on the brokenness of this world. Our leadership model is focused on the goodness of the world. We have it's called, take a flashlight in your organization and shine it around and look for the goodness in people and let them know. So we are constantly, again, like raising children, looking for people and holding it up and saying thank you. So we drowned out kind of the brokenness. So often I get the question, what do you do about the people that don't get it? My answer is, treat them like your son or daughter. They say, well, that would be different. I said, why would it be different? It's somebody's son or daughter you're dealing with who wants the best for their child. So I would say to you, believing in the goodness of people, which is, I think, is most of our faith, very much is an integral part of this book.
Many leaders in an organization are trapped in the traditional ways of looking at people, as functions, as headcount. Some quote-unquote managers know there's a better way to lead, but don't know where to start. Here Bob addresses a question from the audience, asking how broken leaders can turn things around.
Yeah, well, my journey to this was a very kind of eclectic experiences of revelations. The wedding when I realized that, I was so enamored with this young man and woman being married and how precious they were. And I realized that day that all 11,000 of our people were just as cute and precious as this couple. And so that day we said that everybody works for us as somebody's precious child who was brought into this world with the intention of that child being whoever they're intended to be. And that was part of our stewardship. So the problem is, in our universities today, we're teaching management. So we have a lot of people that are broken because they were never created in the image of being leaders. I once asked a dean of a business school, what is your vision for the 2 years in graduate school, MBA programs? You have young men and women. What is your vision for when they leave your school, they'll be able to become? And he said, we don't have a vision. We have beliefs that are on the wall. I said, well, if you don't have a vision, how do you know what to teach? He said, we teach what the market wants. And I said, Dean, if you ever ask me to be on your school board, which I am sure you will not after this conversation, you have to have a vision of creating leaders. People who have a profound understanding of how their leadership will affect other people's lives, and then give them the tools to do that. And so when you graduate, you can either go into nonprofit or the military or education or healthcare, but we need to create leaders. And so that we have a lot of people who intend well, but they're taught to be managers. When I was in business school, it was always about me. I went to business school and was taught, do you want to be successful? You learn this, you do this, you get a job in that, you'll make good money, and you'll have a successful career. Never in my education or my experience outside of school was anybody made me aware that what I did to be successful would impact other people's lives. I was taught to use people, unintentionally, to use people for my success. And then they graduate and they get into business, and it's all about results. It's not about human. But we're all broken. I just happen to be blessed with these revelations, trying to raise good kids. Leadership and parenting is identical. Parenting is the stewardship of the precious lives that come into your life through birth, adoption, or second marriage. And we take it all very seriously. And we can focus on how important it is for us to give them the tools. What is leadership? It's a stewardship of the people whose lives walk into your building every day, hoping that they're going to get a chance to be who they're intended to be and appreciated for whatever that is. And so everybody like you is broken because we have a broken system. We teach brokenness, and then we experience. And so we get into what I call the flow. I know how to be a manager. I tell people what to do. I fire people. I get results. I've had people tell me remember, most people go home broken from businesses. Remember, there's a 20% increase in heart attacks on Monday morning when people go to work. 20% increase in heart attacks on Monday morning, okay? 74% of all illnesses are chronic, and the biggest cause of chronic is stress, and the biggest cause of stress is work. The crisis we have in healthcare is caused by the way we treat people, okay? The Mayo Clinic told one of our team members, somebody interfacing with Mayo Clinic said, if you want to talk about somebody's health, ask who their supervisor is, okay? So the good news is we don't need to raise taxes. We don't need to elect a different president. The outcome is totally in our hands. All you have to do is care.
There's a lot in Everybody Matters about the similarities between leadership and parenting. Here Raj talks about how writing Everybody Matters has affected his thinking about parenting, while Bob answers a question about how his late father would feel if he saw the company today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, Bob has become an informal kind of advisor to me on parenting. I call him with the toughest challenges, you know. Very much so, I think. I mean, I'm starting to see those parallels, you know, and also the question that you asked, I think, is very connected to that. You cannot run a conscious business without having a conscious leader, and you cannot be a conscious leader without being a conscious human being. And so working on yourself is the most important thing a leader can do, right? Because the level of consciousness of the leader becomes kind of an upper limit on the level of consciousness of the organization. And if you get stuck, the organization is stuck. If you've got certain ways in which you feel broken, the organization is going to reflect that as well. So I think continuing on that journey, you know, I teach a course on conscious capitalism, and about a third of the course really is about that journey of personal mastery, personal growth, self-awareness, you know, being in touch with the authenticity of who you are. How do you operate from that? How do you heal the brokenness, you know, the wounded inner child that we all carry around with us? My next book is also about achieving wholeness in a different dimension, which is the masculine and feminine. How do we integrate the masculine and feminine within us? Inside every man, there's an inner woman. Inside every woman, there's an inner man, right? But society has kind of suppressed the feminine side in everybody. And that creates a lot of wounding. And how do we create? There's a beautiful symbol in India. It's called the Ardhanareshwar. It shows half male, half female God, right? There's Shiva, the god of consciousness and stillness, and Shakti, which represents dynamism and energy and vitality, right? Which is the feminine side. And it's really that blending. So how do we evolve towards that? So I think working on ourselves as leaders is the most essential thing. And when we do that, it shows up in our parenting, it shows up in our teaching, in our leadership, I think, in every respect. It has to start there.
Well, about 5 years ago, I was in an intense conversation with a lady that I met at a dinner party, and we were at the dinner table, and she asked me a question I'd never been asked before, and she said, "What do you think heaven looks like?" Well, you know, that's an interesting question for dinner. And so I thought a minute, and I said, I think heaven looks like a chance to sit across from my father, you know, who died in 1975, and show him what came of this company that he worked at it for almost 25 years, could never get it out of the ditch it was in when he acquired it, and to show him what became of that and how it impacted my mother, his wife, and his grandchildren. And somebody said to me, "Well, I'm sure he knows." And I said, "Yeah, but I want to see his face." Because, my dad worked really hard to keep this company alive, but, you know, it was a broken $18 million company when he died. And, as you read in the book, the first person I met after he died was the banker who pulled our loan. So it's been a journey from a very broken company. And he died of a heart attack in 1975. He would have a triple heart attack if he saw he wouldn't believe what occurred with the company, because it was beyond our wildest imagination. So I would say to you, have a vision. The other thing we teach, have a vision of everybody should have a vision for your life, and they should have a vision for your company. If any company you work for, where are you going as a company? Why do you want to go there? And when you get there, why will you have taken your people to a better place? Every company should ask that question. That's one of the Leadership Institute does. It works with organizations for, what is your vision? Where are you going? Why do you want to go there? And if you don't know there, how do you do anything? How do I make decisions today? So I think, taking a broken company as we did with a rich history in St. Louis and creating now a vibrant global organization is a tremendous sense of success, because we're touching 11,000 people's lives. They're going home feeling valued. They're raising better kids. Communities can depend upon us being there. So my dad he wouldn't believe it, honestly. It was so far from his 23 years experience.
Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter @Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.